Hello my bookish friends out there in booktube land. Today we're going to take a look at Mercutio's Queen Mab speech in Romeo and Juliet. So get out your play and follow along. So Mercutio's speech, the Queen Mab speech, is from Romeo and Juliet, Act 1, Scene 4. Now let's just get the quick background. Mercutio is talking to Romeo, who says he's been having a dream, and basically Mercutio's sort of mocking Romeo playfully, but strangely enough there is a great sense of foreboding and foreshadowing as the speech moves on. The reason he's mocking Romeo is because Romeo has fallen head over heels like he is wont to do. He's fallen in love with Rosalind, who has not even seen him, doesn't know who he is. But Rosalind is a Capulet, so there's a big party going on, and of course the Montagues, of which Romeo is one, are not invited. But they say, him and his friends Benvolio and Mercutio are like, oh come on, let's go and gate crash. We'll put on masks and we'll go in and you can get to see Rosalind. But Mercutio does sort of ridicule Romeo's youthful teenage fall in love with every girl that he meets who's pretty, you know, that kind of thing. So we're going to do something slightly different in this video if you've watched any other of my Shakespeare videos, the Shakespeare Explained series. And I'd like you to tell me what you think of doing it this way. I'm going to read the speech full first, and then we'll go and break it all down. And that way, if you already know the speech, you can jump ahead in the video. But it's nice to hear it all put together rather than me doing it disjointedly bit by bit. So let's just read through the speech. I'll just read the first few lines before the speech. Romeo says, I dreamt a dream tonight. Mercutio says, and so did I. Romeo says, well, what was yours? And Mercutio says, that dreamers often lie. And Romeo takes up the sentence and turns it into something else. He says, in bed asleep while they do dream things true. So Mercutio is saying, dreams are false. You know, this falling in love is nonsense so quickly. Dreamers often lie. But Romeo turns it into the sentence, dreamers often lie in bed where they dream things true. And Mercutio thinks, oh dear, you're love-smitten, aren't you? And here's the beginning of the speech. So let's just read it. Oh, then, I see Queen Mab hath been. She is the fairies' midwife, and she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone on the forefinger of an older man, drawn with a team of little atomies athwart men's noses as they lie asleep. Her waggon spokes made of long spinners' legs, the cover of the wings of grasshoppers, the traces of the smallest spider's web, the collars of the moonshine watery beams, her whip of cricket's bone, the lash of film, her waggoner a small grey-coated gnat not half so big as a round little worm, pricked from the lazy finger of a maid. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut made by the joiner squirrel or old grub, time out of mind the fairies' coachmakers. And in this state she gallops, night by night, through lovers' brains, and then they dream of love. Or courtiers' knees that dream on curtsies straight, or lawyers' fingers who straight dream on fees, or ladies' lips who straight on kisses dream, which oft the angry Mab with blisters plays because their breaths with sweetmeats tainted are. Sometimes she gallops o'er a courtier's nose, and then dreams he of smelling out a suit, and sometime comes she with the tithe-pig's tail, tickling a parson's nose as lies asleep, then dreams he of another benefice. Sometime she driveth o'er a soldier's neck, and then dreams he of cutting foreign throats, of breaches, ambuscados, Spanish blades, of health's 5 fathom deep, and then anon drums in his ear, at which he starts and wakes, and being thus frighted, swears a prayer or two, and sleeps again. This is the very Mab that plats the manes of horses in the night, and bakes the elf-locks in foul sluttish hairs, which once entangled much misfortune bodes. This is the hag, where maids lie on their backs, that presses them, and learns them first to bear, making them women of good carriage. This is she. Okay, that was not excellently read, I apologise, but I hope you got the sense that he starts off playful, and towards the end there's this turning ominous sensation regarding this Queen Mab, the midwife of the fairies. So let's now break this down, because it's ever such a good speech. And you could make an argument in this almost tragicomedy of Romeo and Juliet that perhaps Shakespeare might be getting at the problem of young love, not necessarily celebrating it, but when families and parents don't pay earnest attention to their children, youths can get themselves into great misfortune in life. You've got to remember that at this period of life in the Shakespearean age, Juliet is 14 years old and it's permissible for them to marry. If you ever have read the memoirs of Casanova, you'll know that he seduces young teenagers himself. This was acceptable. And when I read Mercutio's speech, there's something about it, I'm not sure, but there's just something about it that makes me think, is Shakespeare actually condemning this kind of young love? Not that young love is wrong, but that if it is not checked by those who know better, it can lead to disaster for young ones, because after all, what does happen to Romeo and Juliet? So let's take the speech apart, shall we? Our first sentence by Mercutio is, "Oh then, I see Queen Mab hath been, she is the fairies' midwife." Let's just leave it at that. Queen Mab. Queen Mab is a fairy in British folklore, actually more Celtic folklore than anything. And of course, the fairies tend to be a benevolent species that live close by humans, and they can be mischievous. And the fact that this is Queen Mab says that she's got a certain amount of power as a fairy, although Shakespeare calls her the fairies' midwife. Now, the name Mab is just a shortened form of Mabel, or possibly more accurately, Maybelline. Not Maybelline, as in the makeup, but Maybelline. Maybe it's Maybelline. Sorry. Maybelline actually means lovable. So we've got this fairy that seems to be connected to love. And what does Mercutio say? There's Romeo saying, "Oh, I've had this dream about a girl." And Mercutio says, "Oh, I see you've been visited by Queen Mab. She is the fairies' midwife." Now, what does that mean? Well, a midwife delivers. Fairies have their fairy dust and can bring about charms and luck and wishes and all that kind of jazz. So Queen Mab, being the fairies' midwife, simply means she delivers men's wishes to them as they lay asleep. And now Mercutio gives us a charming little description of how small this little Queen Mab is. He says, "And she comes in shape no bigger than an agate stone on the forefinger of an older man." So an agate stone, that's a semi-precious stone which you would have in a ring, and on a forefinger of an older man, that's a man of the town, the rich merchants of the town. So she's the size of a small gem in a ring. That's what he's saying about her. And continuing this idea of how small she is and how she travels, he's going to now describe the way she moves around. He says, "She's drawn with a team of little atomies athwart men's noses as they lie asleep." So she's drawn, she's in a carriage or a chariot. She's being drawn as if by horses, but did you see what was drawing her? Little atomies, faint specks. The horses that pull her are tiny because she's tiny. And athwart men's noses, she can travel up the nose. Remember, she brings to fruition dreams, so she gets into the minds of the people that are sleeping and plays tricks with them because she's a little tinker. Let's carry on with this description of her chariot or her carriage. "Her wagon spokes made of long spinners' legs, the cover of the wings of grasshoppers, the traces of the smallest spider's web, the collars of the moonshine's watery beams. Her whip of cricket's bone, the lash of film. Her waggoner, a small grey-coated gnat, not half so big as a round little worm. So did you get that, what her carriage is made up of? It says that the spokes on the wheels are as thin as spiders' legs, or they are spiders' legs. The cover, so the canopy over the top of her, grasshopper's wings. Think of how translucent and thin they are. The traces, so that's the edging. You know, you get like maybe you get a red carriage with gold trims. That's the tracery. It says that's the smallest spider web, the finest spider silk. You imagine catching a really fine thread of spider silk in the sunlight. That's the tracing of her carriage. The collars around maybe around the horses' necks, or the little atomies. The moonshine's watery beam. So moonlight twinkling on water, just those faint flickers of light. So it's quite ethereal, it's quite pretty, but it's very delicate and small. That's what Mercutio is saying. And he's being very poetic and almost teasing Romeo as if he's been visited by this little fairy. It says her whip is a cricket's bone. So a cricket, grasshopper, it's a little bone. That's the handle is made of cricket bone. And the lash, so the whip itself, is a film, a gossamer, okay, a fine thread. And the person driving her wagon, her chariot, the waggoner, is a small grey-coated gnat. So she's an agate stone size and her coachman is a gnat. So she's tiny. Let's carry on. Her chariot is an empty hazelnut made by the joiner squirrel or old grub, time out of mind, the fairies' coachmakers. So her chariot or her carriage is half a hazelnut shell that's been hollowed out by a squirrel. He's the joiner, the cabinet maker, the woodworker. Or an old grub that's got into a nut, the hazelnut, and eaten it away until it's hollow. And that's the fairies' carriage makers from time immemorial, these squirrels and grubs. And then it says, and in this state she gallops night by night through lovers' brains, and then they dream of love. So, oh Romeo, you've been visited by Queen Mab, and in her little chariot, all so fine and dainty, she shot up your nose while you slept, and she's given you these little dreams which you take to be true and meaningful. This love you've got of Rosalind is just a passing whim. You're a boy, and you just get your head turned by every good-looking girl, which of course is true. And this foreshadows or predicts that he's about to have his head turned by somebody else, because at the party where he goes to see Rosalind, he meets Juliet and she turns his head. And so you see how he's playing light with him. But he carries on. A bit of rhetorical device now. If you've seen some of my other videos, you'll be aware of the phrase anaphora. Now that's where you start a sentence with a similar phrase or structure each time, and you'll see it right here. It hammers a point home. And it makes a speech memorable. So when you leave the playhouse, you can remember the pictures that Mercutio conjured in this speech. It says, or, that's over, it's because it's O''ER, or courtiers' knees that dream on curtsies straight, or lawyers' fingers who straight dream on fees, or ladies' lips who straight on kisses dream. So Mercutio was said, Queen Mab, she's gone into the sleep of a lover and given him dreams of love. But here he's saying she'll bring whatever you want to have, whatever feelings you are, whatever character you are, she'll give you the dream you want. Because if you were a courtier, someone in the king's court, you would dream of curtsies. You know, being elegant and grateful, the proper bow, and that would actually impress people around about, because it was very important how you bowed. Or she crawls over lawyers' fingers, and they dream of fees. So lawyers, obviously, even now, are known to just make a lot of money. So their little fingers twitching in the night is Queen Mab giving them a dream of making cash. And then he says, or ladies' lips. So ladies who straight dream of kisses. So they're just dreaming of the love of their life, and they're having a little romantic novel in their sleep. So do you see what Queen Mab does? And Mercutio's saying, Romeo, that's all your dream is. It's just this very plain tricks on you. Then he changes his tone ever so slightly. With that bit where he says, o'er ladies' lips who straight on kisses dream, he then says, which oft the angry Mab with blisters plagues, because their breaths with sweetmeats tainted are. There's just a sinister side to Queen Mab now. She's a fairy that can grant dreams, but also she can be mischievous. And it says here that she taints these ladies who are dreaming of kisses with blisters plagues. You could think of cold sores, which is herpes from kissing too many lovers, perhaps. But why does she blister the lady's sleep? It's because she's got breath like sweetmeats, pastries, cake, candy kind of thing. She's got this sweet breath, and it's almost like Queen Mab is jealous. And so she may give them pleasant dreams, but also if they act on said dreams, it can be a curse for them. So now we get a sense of doom in maybe Romeo's future. Queen Mab can fill you with a dream which you feel is true, which is what Romeo said. They are true. The dreamer lies in bed and dreams things which are true. And that can lead to trouble. Queen Mab can get angry. And as it happens, we know the famous story of Romeo and Juliet. What happens with this dreamer of love when he meets Juliet? Of course, things don't go well. But let's carry on, and we will see... we're going to see how Queen Mab turns into a bit more of a malevolent figure if she wants to be. By the way, there's the anaphora. Did you notice? Or courtier's knees, or lawyer's fingers, or lady's lips. And that dream on, who's straight dream on, who's straight on. You'll see that if you get the play out yourself and look at it, you'll see that that's what's written here. So he's hammering a point home. So, sometimes she gallops o'er a courtier's nose, over his nose, and then dreams he of smelling out a suit. So a courtier's nose, again, somebody who has access to the royal court, and he smells out a suit. That does not mean he smells out a new change of clothes or a new Sunday best. People of the day, the commoners, if they wanted to get something done, maybe a more wealthy merchant who wasn't a courtier, he could befriend a courtier and ask him to present a petition in court and try and get something for him. Now, of course, the courtiers would charge for this. So Queen Mab, for the courtiers who are greedy, she drives over their nose in their sleep, and they dream of a suit, someone coming to them who's going to pay them a small fortune to get them to do something at the royal court. And then it says, and sometime comes she with the tithe pig's tail tickling a parson's nose as a lies asleep. Then dreams he of another benefice. So the parson, so the priest, it says she tickles him with the tithe pig's tail. Remember, a parson or a priest could actually have more than one church under his authority, and you were supposed to pay a tithe of your belongings. Now, if you had rich landowners in your parish as a parson, they might give you a pig as a tithe. Well, that's a very valuable animal. That's meat, isn't it? And it says, imagine she's cut the tail off a pig, and in the parson's sleep tickles his nose with it. Oh, and he dreams of a benefice. That means a blessing by the commoner by giving something to the church, which he's going to get. So, all in all, Queen Mab, as we can see over and over and over again, just tickles the fancy of whatever people are inclined or want to believe, or whatever they love. And so Romeo's dream of love is not real, it is a lie. Dreamers lie, said Mercutio. But now it takes a bit of a turn, slightly macabre. Look what Mercutio says next. Sometime she driveth over a soldier's neck, and then dreams he of cutting foreign throats, of breaches, ambuscados, Spanish blades of half 5 fathom deep, and then anon drums in his ear, at which he starts and wakes. and being thus frighted, swears a prayer or two and sleeps again. Okay, so playing on a soldier's mind now. What fills a soldier's mind? Well, it says she drives over his throat, and he dreams of cutting his enemies' throats. And he dreams of breaches. A breach is where a hole has been made in a city's defences or in a castle wall, and you rush through it. He dreams of that. Ambuscados, ambushes. He dreams of all the action of fighting. And Spanish blades. So you can see what he's dreaming about. And Queen Mab is giving this. But this is the last one that Mercutio refers to. And so he's just twisted the point from being fun to also be careful, Romeo. Dreams can lead to blood and death, which of course in Romeo and Juliet it does, by a blade of all things. And then says that because of these images of the soldier, she then drums on his ear, that is the eardrum, and he's startled awake. It's like a nightmare. So instead of a dream, she's given him a nightmare. And he swears a few prayers to God. Oh, save me, Lord, and then goes back to sleep. So can you see that there's this macabre twist now? This is the last of those things where Mercutio lists what Queen Mab does, what dreams she brings to people. It ends with, she can also bring a nightmare. And doesn't that sort of prophesy the doom that Romeo will find himself in? He's dreamed of love. It's come from Queen Mab. She's gone up his nose at night and filled him with a senseless wonder. But it could be a nightmare. And now Mercutio comes to really the warning point for Romeo. The whole speech has sort of turned around in its tone. It's become dangerous. Because look what he says next. This is the very Mab that plats the manes of horses in the night, and bakes the elf-locks in foul sluttish hairs, which once untangled much misfortune bodes. Do you understand what he's saying here? Think of a horse in the stables. Now remember that Romeo is a Montague, so he's a noble family, and he'll be used to having a horse. Well, of course, all horses have groomsmen, because their hair, particularly the mane, gets tangled. If you've ever been to a stable and it's not been, you've seen a horse that's not been groomed, the mane can be quite coarse, and where the dirt is, it gets matted together. Okay, and so the actual folklore, and this talks about children's hair and maidens' hair as well as horses' manes, is that at night the fairies play in and out of the hair, and as it grips them and they move in between various threads, it knots everything up, and that's why you wake up with knotted hair, children in particular, because fairies love to give them the dreams. But they also said that's what happened to horses' manes. So he says this is the Mab, Queen Mab, the same fairy, who knots up hair. Now, knots up hair is a negative. It says plaiting. Now, what's really interesting about this plaiting, if you think of the Celts way back when, they often had what we would call dreadlocks or matted hair. They were pagans. This knotting up of the hair comes from a fairy. Fairies are pagan folklore. Often Shakespeare refers to classical Greek gods, which are termed as civilized and just represent the earth. There's nothing remotely wrong with them according to the church. Or he'll make reference to the Bible, but he's chosen of all things to pick Queen Mab, a fairy from pagan Celtic folklore. And the knotting of hair, the superstition was, once you combed the knots out, if the fairies had played there and you straightened out their mess, they would come and not curse you, but be a tinker to you. They would give ill foreboding. They could cause trouble. And it says the elf-locks in foul sluttish hair. Well, elf-locks, again, fairy. They're going in and out. So that's why it was called an elf-lock, which has later turned into dreadlock. So Mercutio is saying, Romeo, oh, it's all well and good, these light flights of whimsy, these dreams of love. But Queen Mab, symbolically, these dreams can lead to bad luck. they can lead to a curse. Don't be so quick to turn your head to love a girl at first sight. That's Mercutio's message. Isn't that brilliant? Isn't that excellent? Just think of it for ourselves. We go along with the Queen Mab depiction and we think, isn't this quaint? Isn't this cute? Isn't this all fairy tale folklore and wonderful and magical? But magic has its dark side. It's pagan. It's there to bewitch. And witches, again, often had horsehair knots in their hovels. So it's a symbol of pagan sorcery. Mercutio saying, look out, Romeo. And how does he finish? This is the hag. This isn't Queen Mab. It's the witch Mab. So it's a bewitching love which does not mean well. This is the hag when maids lie on their backs, that presses them and learns them first to bear, making them women of good carriage. This is she, and then Romeo cuts him off. So what does this hag Mab do? She's the witch. It says, when maids lie on their backs, so they're asleep in bed, that presses them and learns them first to bear, making them women of good carriage. Now, there could well be some sexual innuendo in this. It was a bit of a lewd time period, and lots of people can read into this sexual innuendo. But at least on its surface level, he's saying, when girls, we're talking young maidens, when they lie asleep, this hag Mab will give them dreams that are not so innocent, that will be of embracing a lover, to take them into their bosom, to learn to bear, that's to have children. Well, obviously there's been a sexual act then. And that's where you get the sense, is Shakespeare warning his audience about their own children? That young love may look all sweet and innocent, but you should watch over them, because many a youngster gets into trouble because of their flights of loving fancy, or can even be seduced to lose their maidenhood. Now, I'm a rarity in thinking this. Lots of people just think that Shakespeare was like everybody else and was just sex mad and all that kind of thing. I'm not so sure, and I'd like you to at least give it some thought. That was he possibly saying about Romeo and Juliet that the story is romantic and young love is beautiful, but it can be disastrous, and that he's not encouraging it? Maybe that's why we revolt knowing that Juliet is 14. But at the end, isn't it a calamity for all involved? Is Shakespeare perhaps making a comment that he disagrees with children falling into love and going into romances and trying to get married behind their parents' back? But whose fault is it? It was the families feuding. So weigh it up for yourself. What do you think of that idea? Try and take it a bit further and argue in favour of it to start with. And then if you find it unusual, counter-argue it. And leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to see what other people think of this somewhat different way of looking at Shakespeare's message. But whatever conclusion you come to, how amazing is Mercutio's speech? It's beautiful. So get it out and read it better than I did at the beginning. And just enjoy the way that something light and breezy is then turned into a cautionary tale. If you love classics and classic literature and Shakespeare, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so that you never miss out on another episode of Tristan and the Classics. I wish you well in your reading journey.